Hey everybody, welcome. Excited to have you guys back. My name is Ty Hicks, founder of mentalhealthcoach.com. Today we're going to be covering how can you assist your kids if they're dealing with anxiety or other mental health issues. And for context, just so you know where this information is coming from, so firstly, my mental health journey began when I was a child as well. And it really peaked, especially when I was in my mid-teens, middle school, high school age. So I dealt with anxiety and depression, especially in a large way, very noticeable way between ages 11 and 14 is when I really started to peak. And my suicide plan was interrupted when I was at age 14. And that's when I was hospitalized, put on medication, put into therapy, and basically all of the standard traditional stuff was kind of thrown at me. But those things didn't really work all that well. And so I had to figure out my own way to work through those issues. So a lot of this is from my own personal experience. Secondly, as I began my career working in the field, helping other people with their mental health challenges, I also sought out mentors and guides and information from people who had a lot more experience than I do. And one of the very first sources of information that I had was way above my pay grade at the time. A brilliant woman named Chloe Madanis. And this is a woman who quite literally wrote the books on family dynamics, interfamily systems, how to create peaceful, harmonious family life, what is really going on when children are dealing with mental health issues and when they are acting out, and how do you make sure that you solve the mental health issues both at the level of the parents, the children, and create a overall harmonious family system. And so I got to learn a massive amount of information from her as she mentored me and guided me over the years. And I applied a lot of what she taught me in my own work. And over the past 8 or so years I've been doing this professionally, I've worked with parents predominantly. So the majority of my clients are usually parents, not all of them, of course, but a good deal of them. And so I've had to get accustomed to helping coach and guide people when they're dealing with issues with their kids. And then I've also worked directly with a good number of kids, usually teenagers, ages 13 to 18 is a fairly common age range for me to work with them directly as a client. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you are basically the kind of key top line major things that I've seen as the big themes. They really are big indicators as to what is causing the problem, and then more importantly, how do you actually create a solution. So if you've got a kid who's dealing with an anxiety issue or some other sort of mental health issue, maybe they're feeling depressed, or they're having major mood swings, maybe they're acting out, maybe they are just simply making some chronic bad decisions, things of that nature. This will all be very, very relevant for you. And then again, as always, if you have questions or concerns specific to your specific scenario, just go ahead and put them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer them live, or we'll go ahead and make sure that you get support one way or another. Okay, so let's start off with the key major headline. I'm going to be walking through about 6 items here, and I'm going to be covering them in relation to how important and critical they are. So I'm going to be starting with the most critical insights that I've found, and then I'm going to be working down to the things that may or may not apply depending on your circumstance. And then at the end, I'll help you understand what you can do if you need some additional information. Okay, so the first big breakthrough that I got, especially from my mentor, Chloe Madanis, and this has been proven to me again and again, over and over when I work with people on these issues, is if the parents are all right, the kids are all right. So what I see, especially in today's day and age, like ever since 2018 and beyond, there's been an interesting trend that has occurred with adolescent or child mental health challenges. So because mental health is now becoming a thing that everybody's talking about, and there's a lot of content out there and there's a lot of information out there, and people are becoming more sensitive to it, which all in all is a good thing, parents have had a tendency to basically put all of their focus and energy on their child when their child is demonstrating that they're having some sort of issue, mentally or emotionally. And on the surface, you would think that this is what makes sense, right? It seems to make good sense, the logic behind it, right? You want to be there for your child. You want to be a good attentive parent. You want to make sure that they get what they need. You want to make sure they get the right help, etc. And what I'm here to tell you is that the intention behind that is good, and in many cases those types of actions can lead to good outcomes. But 90% of the time, parents are looking in the wrong direction for what the real source of the problem is. What they usually believe is, my child needs to be diagnosed, my child needs to be medicated, my child needs to be put into therapy, my child needs, to see the school counselor, what have you, right? And in some cases, each of those things may add a little bit of value. But what I'm here to tell you is that over and over and over again, what I see to be the dominant pattern is that whenever children are manifesting a mental, emotional, or behavioral issue of some kind, it is usually because the parents, either one or both of the parents, is going through some sort of chronic mental health and or relationship issue. And looking back on it, what's interesting is this was exactly what was going on in my life when I was in my teens. So my parents at the time were not in a good spot whatsoever. Their relationship was very tumultuous. There was constant arguing going on. There were a lot of other things that were just not going well. I'll spare the details out of respect to my family. But let's suffice it to say it was very turbulent. It was very emotionally unstable. It was very anxiety-inducing. And the thing was, I started to manifest depression and basically the equivalent of like anxiety attacks. And in some small ways, I was kind of acting out. And if you would have asked me at the time, like if somebody would have sat me down, if a therapist would have sat me down, or if my parents would have sat me down, and if they would have asked like, hey, what's going on? I would have given a very different answer. I would have said, well, things are not going great at school. My friends are this and my friends are that, and my girlfriend dumped me, and I would have given all of these sort of superficial answers. But looking back on it, what I can realize now is that it really all was a big subconscious cry for my parents to work their issues out, to come together, and to become united again. And this was the big, big insight that I got from Chloe Madonis, because she has worked with relationships and family systems and marriages for decades, like 50 some plus years. And she started to see this pattern again and again in her work. So what would happen is she'd go into a family, and the family would basically say like, oh, well, little Susie, we don't know what's going on. Susie's cutting herself, or Susie is doing things at school. Her grades are tanking, or she keeps talking back and getting into fights, or she's isolating herself in her room, or so the parents would describe what it is that was going on with the kids, and naturally the parents would want solutions for what was going on with the kids. So they would think, Chloe, can you please talk with the child? Can you do some therapy with them? Do we need to medicate them, etc.? And what Chloe started to realize is that if she just focused on what was going on with the child, that 9 times out of 10, it wouldn't really go very far, or there would be some sort of a relapse back into the old pattern. But instead, what she started to look at were 2 primary things. She started to look at what was the mental health like of the parents. Number 2, what was the relationship like with the parents? So, and as in the parents with each other, not the parents with the child. So what she found is that, call it 80-90% of the time. I don't have an exact statistic for you. I will tell you, though, in my experience, it's well above 80% of the time. When we fix the issues going on with the parents, the issues with the kids resolve themselves automatically. Now, this is not every single time, but even in the situations where you would think, oh, no, there's no way that what's going on with us is affecting the child, okay? And these are some of the lies that parents will tell themselves. They will tell themselves things like, oh, yeah, I've got horrible anxiety, but I always make sure to never let it affect my kids. I always make sure to never let my kids see me like that. Okay, I hear that all the time. Or people will say, well, yeah, me and their father we're not really getting along very well, but we never show that to the kids. If we ever have an argument, we always take it somewhere else. We never want it affecting the kids. And what I'm here to tell you is that this is a delusion. Okay, parents often think that they are compartmentalizing their issues, and that they are shielding and preventing their children from being exposed to what's going on. And I'm here to tell you unequivocally, categorically, that is not how it works. Okay? Parents tend to think that kids are only affected by what kids see. False. Incorrect. What I'm here to tell you is kids are affected by what they feel. Okay? And when you are in the presence of somebody who is deeply anxious, you feel it. When you're in the presence of somebody who's deeply anxious and they're pretending that they're not deeply anxious, you feel it. When you're in the presence of both family members or just one member of the couple, of the married couple, and there's issues, tension, drama, you know it. Okay? Like, think about it. Just remember what it was like back when you were a kid. Okay, this is the big disconnect I see with people. Like, adult parents think that their kids are far more oblivious to things than they themselves were to what was going on with their parents when they were kids, if that makes sense to you. So if you're a parent of a child, remember what it was like when you were 10, 12, 13, 14, whatever age you were. You knew when mom was upset. You knew when dad was upset. You knew when mom was freaking out. You knew when dad was freaking out. You knew when mom and dad were getting along. You knew when there was some big unresolved issue lingering under the surface. You knew when mom and dad were being passive aggressive with each other, right? You knew when mom and dad were lying to you. You knew when mom and dad were lying to each other. Kids are remarkably emotionally intelligent. They are remarkably emotionally intuitive. And so if you think you're compartmentalizing your kids and siloing them from the drama that's going on with you individually or your spouse, this is the big wake-up call I want you to understand. This is perhaps the main motivation why I decided to film this for you, is I want to dispel this belief and this myth once and for all, and I want you to understand that as well-intentioned as you are to want to put all of your focus and attention on your child, what is actually the truth of the matter is that your child's issues are not going to be resolved until your issues are resolved. And you may not think that that's the case, but again, I'm making this and putting this out there now only after I've been doing this professionally for almost a decade, because this is not something I was completely, totally sure of years ago, but now I've had enough experience to verify through my own experience with clients that this is the main issue the vast majority of the time. It's so much the issue that I actually believe that, with the exception of maybe a couple isolated situations, both parents must make sure that they are sound of mind and body, and then the relationship between the parents must be sound as well. That doesn't mean perfect. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect people. What it basically means is that there cannot be lingering, chronic, undealt with emotional baggage. Okay, so in the case of an individual level, if one or both of the parents is dealing with an anxiety issue, you've got mood swing issues, one or more of you is dealing with depression, etc., it is virtually a guarantee that one of your kids or multiple is going to manifest some sort of mental or emotional issue down the line. It is not going to be anything that's directly related to what you're dealing with. It is actually more than likely going to feel completely, totally separate. It will look totally separate. And that's why we create these beliefs that say, oh, no, it can't be what I'm dealing with that affects the kid. But I'm just here to tell you, the only metaphor I can use is, like, think of like a tea, or like a tea bag in hot water. Okay, if you have a cup of, let's say, cold water, you dip the tea in it. It doesn't behave the same way as if you have scalding hot tea and then you dip the tea bag in it. And so all I can help you understand is that you, as the parent, and then also if you're married, then your spouse comes into this too. You basically are creating the emotional environment in which your child operates in. The emotional environment is like the water, while your child is like the tea bag. So the water is what's going to determine what the tea bag does, more so than the tea bag of its own free will or agency. The environment is far more powerful, and that's what's really fascinating. So looking back on my story, my depression culminated in a very elaborate suicide plan. But my suicide plan, looking back on it, I can see now, I actually didn't want to go through with it. I left breadcrumbs all over the place, but at the time I was not conscious that I was doing that. At the time, if somebody would have said, "Do you want to get caught?" I would have said, "Absolutely not. I do not want to get caught." But what I realized I was doing is I was leaving breadcrumbs so that this kind of big crisis would occur, and it would force my parents to come together and unite and basically solve the problem of me as a way to unify the two of them. And bizarrely, that is basically what happened. My depression and my big elaborate suicide issue basically got my parents to reevaluate and realize that they had some issues that they needed to sort through and deal with. And it ended up kind of working out that way, where the family system on the whole was better off in the long run. So I'm a big believer in the power of the subconscious, and I'm a big believer that the subconscious is what's driving the vast majority of our decisions. And it's just bizarre that I was unaware at the time that that's what I was doing, but I can see it clear as day now, right? So, and this is basically the theory that Chloe Madonis kind of shared with me, and it confirmed. I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened with me. And this manifests in all sorts of different ways. It can also manifest where, you know, say like one of the parents has got like a major stressful job, and their boss is being unfair to them, and it's a, you know, really bad environment. The child, sometimes a child will manifest like nausea, headaches, illnesses that the doctors can't really diagnose, to force the parents to have to stay home and take care of the kid, to make sure that the parent is no longer going towards their job. So what Chloe Madonis figured out is that children have a very, very strong subconscious urge to protect their parents. This is the crazy thing. It's crazy, and it's sort of unfair, really, that kids do this, but it's the truth. And so what will happen is kids will manifest mental and emotional challenges subconsciously as a way to divert their parents' attention or focus away from whatever it is that's stressing their parents out. It's a very weird thing, and it manifests in a lot of different ways. But that's why we have to solve what's going on with the parents, so that way the child no longer feels the subconscious urge to manifest something that's going to try to solve a problem. It's fascinating, it's kind of disturbing, but this pattern exists, and it happens all the time. So I'm here to tell you, if either you or your partner has some sort of unresolved thing that's taking up emotional space for either one of you, I guarantee you your kids feel it to some degree, and I guarantee you to some degree your kids feel responsible for the happiness of the parents. And as parents, you go, oh, well, that's completely BS. And you know what? I'm going to go sit Susie down, and I'm going to tell Susie that she is not responsible for making me happy, and that my anxiety is my anxiety, and she needs to focus on being a kid. And I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Thank you, Ty, for figuring this out. I'm going to go talk to her right now, and that's going to be the end of it. And wrong. That's not how it works. Okay? You can tell your kids till you're blue in the face that it's not their responsibility to try to make you happy, that it's not their responsibility to try to protect you, that they don't need to feel responsible for your emotional well-being. Does not matter. It's something about the programming in us as human beings. They will continue to feel a subconscious responsibility to solve your challenges. This is why there's a fundamental mismatch between what parents think is best for their kids and what is actually best for their kids. Parents believe, well, I can't focus on my own issues. I can't really focus on fixing things with my husband. I've got to make sure that my kid is figured out and sorted out, and I got to put all my attention on them and make sure that they get all the help that they need. That, ironically, is not what they need 90% of the time. What they actually need is you to deal with your own shit. And the selfless thing is you putting yourself first. That's what's ironic. We tend to think that it's selfish by putting ourselves first, and we need to put our kids first. But what I'm here to tell you is the way to put your kids first is you must deal with your stuff. If there is an ongoing misunderstanding that's affecting the marriage, it's got to get dealt with. Okay, there's a million ways to do it. You can deal with it yourself. If you feel skilled in how to do that, you can hire a professional to help you. There's all sorts of ways to go about it, but it has to be dealt with. And the longer you let it linger, it's like letting the tea bag sit in that water for a longer period of time. The longer you let the environment have that level of toxicity, the more of an effect it's going to have on your kids. And by the way, what you might have thought you just heard is a recommendation to leave your partner or divorce. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, in most cases, that's going to make it worse. I'm not saying never divorce either. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it's the right thing. Sometimes it's not. But you don't want to just immediately go and jump to the idea of, well, I just need to separate from my partner because my partner's the problem and my partner's toxic and it's affecting my kids. And you're telling me I got to deal with the issue to, make things good for my kids. So I guess I just got to divorce my partner. And wrong again. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you got to learn the skills to make sure that the relationship is really, really good and thriving. And you got to learn the skills to actually deal with your mental health issues. And they are there. Okay. If you've got anxiety, if you've got depression, if you've got mood swings, if you got OCD, whatever, I can tell you definitively, unequivocally, categorically, there is a way to deal with those issues, right? Within about 3 to 4 months is usually the timeline it takes for us to help a client figure that out. You don't necessarily have to work with me, okay? If you don't like the cut of my jib, that's fine, but you got to get a solution. You have to figure out how to really deal with the problem, or else your kids are not going to have a fighting chance. And the longer you let this sit and persist, the more likely it's going to become more of a permanent fixture of their personality. So the younger your kids are, actually, let me say this. It's a number one priority regardless of the age of your children, but you want to kill the monster while it's small. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want it to continue to fester and cause issues for your kids unnecessarily. So I've really hit this point hard, and I'm coming on a little strong, but it's because I want to make sure that you get this. Okay, and there's so many stories I could tell you. Like, I'll tell you one or two just to illustrate this. There was the one I was telling you a minute ago was actually a true story. So I had a client. They were completely stressed out, totally anxious, horrifically about their job, okay? Their child was about 8 years old. Their child started all of a sudden dealing with massive migraines. Okay, the child would need to be cared for and watched at home, and the dad would stay at home to watch the child. What we ended up realizing, the doctors couldn't figure it out. The doctors could not figure out any reason why the kid was having these migraines. What we then did was I worked with my client, helped them deal with their anxiety at work, helped them make sure that they were no longer experiencing that sensation at work. I shit you not, the child's migraines went away. Like within a matter of a week or two. It was like immediate turnaround. Okay. Another example I have is I had a woman who had emetophobia. So she was dealing with this, chronic anxiety around vomiting, lots of nausea. She, basically was creating like an eating disorder on top of her anxiety. And her child started acting out in all of the most bizarre ways, and they were revolving around food. So her child was basically like taking food from the kitchen, mashing it up, throwing it in the toilets and clogging up the toilets, which is completely, totally bizarre. The child was about 5-6 years old. And so what I didn't even think that they were related at all. I just helped my client get rid of the emetophobia. She had tried scolding her child, putting on timeout, taking away the iPad, doing all of the things. None of that worked, right? As soon as we got rid of the emetophobia, the child completely lost their fixation with the food and stopped acting out, started listening, had much better obedience. So it's bizarre, but this type of thing happens. And the very common situations are, especially in the teenage years, things like self-harm, cutting, dating somebody who's problematic, reckless behavior, drugs, alcohol, things like that, acting out, all of those sorts of things. Almost always there's something going on with one or both of the parents and or the marriage and the relationship. So to me, this is just evidence of all of the more importance why you got to make sure that you build the foundation correctly first instead of focusing on the roof when your basement is about to implode under itself, right? So we've got to make sure, first of all, your mental health issues are dealt with first, because if you don't deal with that, there's no chance your marriage is going to succeed. Number two, we got to make sure that the core 12 relationship skills are mastered that ensure long-term fulfilling relationships. And then If there's any lingering issues going on with the kids, they should be very, very easy to sort out with the rest of what I'm going to tell you. But what I've told you just now is critical for you to understand, okay? I hope you got the point. But I've seen dozens and dozens of situations that reaffirm and prove this at all age ranges, going all the way up to 18, 19, all the way down to like 3 or 4, okay? So let's move on from there. Let's assume that you have now dealt with your own mental health issues. You are feeling peace of mind on a regular daily basis. So is your partner, and your relationship is in a very good spot. There's no lingering, what we call pebbles in the shoe. There's no unresolved lingering issue that's causing a problem for you. Okay. Now let's move on to the next most important piece of the puzzle in order to further create that environment that's going to help your children thrive. The key concept here is what's called parental alignment. That's the key word, parental alignment. Okay, so this was, again, another big finding of Chloe Madonis over decades and decades and decades of experience. She passed this insight on to me. I've used it in my experience, and I've, again, confirmed how absolutely important this is. So whenever I've got a client who's got a mental health issue, there's always about a 50-50 chance that there's something going on with the kids. I focus with them exclusively on making sure that the mental health issue is dealt with. 9 times out of 10, that will sort out what's going on with the kids. Whenever there is still a lingering issue going on with the kids, this will solve the problem. So usually what's causing the problem is a lack of parental alignment. So here's the key principle. What this means is it is far more important that both parents agree than what the parents specifically agree on. I'll say that again because this is the key thing. It is far more important that both parents agree than it is even that important what the parents agree on. So for example, if you want to raise your kids with an attitude of our kids are going to have all A's and they're going to have chores and they're going to do this and they're going to do that, whatever your specific expectations are, like parents will have different expectations. It doesn't really matter so long as those expectations are agreed upon by both parents. And there's one other layer to that I'll share here in a moment, okay? But all other things being equal, as long as you guys are unified, it sets the child up to have a very fulfilling and a very emotionally thriving experience in their environment. What tends to create experiences of acting out, mood issues, instability with their behavior, things of that nature, is when one parent is communicating one message, both verbally and non-verbally, and then another parent is communicating a different message, verbally or non-verbally. And it goes hand in hand. Very often people have this tendency to go, oh, yeah, well, you know, that's my husband. He's got that big problem because I always tell the kids X and Y and Z, but he lets them get away with X and Y and Z. It's not about your way or the highway, right? It's not about you getting all your way and your husband getting all one way or whatever it is. It's about making sure the two of you become aligned, right? That, in other words, that means that what you say, you mean, and you back that up, both individually and as a couple. It really should be that, like, as the parents, you are speaking from one voice when it comes to the boundaries that are set, the expectations that are set, the punishments when necessary that are going to be there, and the rewards. Okay, those are the key things that you got to be aligned on. If you're not aligned on them, or you're communicating different messages, and again, this can be verbally and non-verbally. So a lot of times what will happen is the people who are married will basically decide, either intentionally or unintentionally, that one member of the couple is going to be the one in charge of discipline. So very often the husbands will delegate this to the wife, or it can happen vice versa, but there will usually be one parent in particular who's setting the expectations and being the disciplinarian, and then there will be one parent who's much more like trying to be friends with the kid rather than being a parent to the kid. And what that does is that creates what's called a cross-generational coalition. Those are bad. If you've got one parent up here, you know, having a relationship to the child where the child is subordinate, that sounds like an icky word, but, you know, just technically that the child needs to listen to the parent and respect their authority on certain things and so forth. But then all of a sudden you have another parent over here laterally with the child. Now you've got a problem, because now you create an incentive for the child and this parent to team up against this parent, and you create all sorts of messy dynamics. You create dynamics where the child doesn't feel like they have to listen. Now the child can play the two parents off of each other, and all sorts of other things that are just not good. Doesn't create the healthy scenario. So the key thing is parents have to be aligned. That's the big headline. Okay. Now, how do you actually do that? Well, there's one strategy that I have prescribed for parents over and over and over again. And when they follow it, it works incredibly well. I've seen it work for ages as young as 5 or 6, all the way up until 18, 19. In fact, even adult children, like 25 years old, if you happen to have an adult child still living in your home, I've seen this work for that as well. By the way, as a side note, this strategy also is remarkably effective if you are a leader or a manager at work and you need to create more unity, harmony, and obedience in your workplace. This works really well. But to be clear, the strategy is not about like how to make kids obey you. That's not what this is about. What it is about is it's about how to make sure that your kids thrive mentally and emotionally, while also making sure that they abide by what you're telling them, and that the overall relationship is more harmonious because they do what you tell them, not because you're trying to control them, but just because you're ideally looking out for their best interest. Okay, so it's called the pick 3 strategy. Okay, so here's the basic principle behind it. Especially when you've got one parent communicating one thing and another parent communicating another thing, kids will feel like they're receiving mixed messages. On top of that, what can sometimes happen is kids will feel that there is no amount of things that they can possibly do that will ever please their parents. So this especially occurs when parents have like 20 different chores and they got to get all A's in class, and they've got to be in sports, and they got to work part-time, and they got to babysit their little brother, and on and on and on. If you have had lots and lots of expectations and you've put them onto your child, what can sometimes happen is children basically create this belief system of, all right, well, screw it, because you're just going to find something else that you're upset with anyway. And that then leads to acting out. That then leads to them disobeying you, talking back, creating all sorts of problems. And then that leads to them not respecting the boundaries that actually matter. And that doesn't end up being good for them in the long run. So the key is both parents need to be aligned, and both parents need to be aligned on a minimum set of expectations, but they need to be the expectations that really, truly matter. So here's what you do. You and your spouse sit down. If you have a spouse, if you're a single parent, you obviously don't need to do this, but you and your spouse sit down, you decide and agree on what are going to be the 3 non-negotiable expectations that we establish with our child. Now, I'll give you a tip. Okay, you need to make sure that these are not expectations that serve you. They need to be expectations that really, truly look out for the best interests of the child. Do not make them arbitrary. Okay, you need to make sure that these are things that matter. So they usually will revolve around things like grades in school. They can sometimes revolve around something like taking care of a younger sibling. They can revolve around, a few chores, things that really matter. I've seen it be like, hey, we need you to take care of your grandma because grandma's going to be living with us. She's sick right now. We need you to take care of her on Tuesdays and Thursday nights because that's when your dad is working, blah, blah, blah. So it's different for each family, all right? So there's no magic list of 3 that works for all kids and all families, and it'd be stupid if I said that there is. But I'll give you a couple of things that's important. Number 1, as I said many times, you and your spouse need to be aligned behind them. That means, number 1, you're aligned behind how you define the expectation. So, for example, if mom says you need to do your chores and dad says you need to do your chores, but what mom's definition of chores is different than dad's definition of chores, no. That's not going to work. And in fact, you can't group in, like you can't say, okay, well, you need to do your chores. That's number 1. Because that's probably going to mean like you got 5 or 6 other things that they need to do. That you can't like sneak those in. You know what I mean? You need to pick the 3 things that matter. So like, for example, I had a client years ago. They had like 7 or 8 different chores they had for their kids. Clean the dishes, put your laundry in the laundry room, clean up your room, make sure the bathroom is clean, blah, 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 blah. And their kids were not following any of it. And so my client did not like my initial recommendation where I said, look, you need to pick the 3 things that really matter most. reinforce those, like totally draw a hard line on those three, and then let the rest go. Right? You and your spouse need to go ahead and do the dishes, or you go ahead and get the laundry out of their closet. Like, figure out the things that really matter. Have them do those three things. And, I recommended that she picked the things that would set them up for independence and adulthood. And that's how we ended up doing that. Because what she didn't like that. She was like, well, they need to do their chores. I grew up with lots of chores. And I said, yeah, how did you feel mentally and emotionally growing up? Right. And she was like, well, not the best, but I was respectful. I'm like, sure, this is not about making sure that your kids never do chores. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying have zero expectations on your kids. I'm just saying you got to pick the expectations that really matter. You need to pick ones that are not arbitrary, and then you and your spouse need to be aligned on those three, and your child is going to be happier, healthier. You're going to have a better relationship with your kid, and you'll be surprised, but your kid will probably go above and beyond because they'll actually feel that they're being successful at pleasing you. This is the really bizarre thing, because that client that didn't like that I was telling her to minimize the expectations, what I said is, hey, you ended up joining this program of mine because you developed crippling anxiety because you felt like you could never please your parents. So let's not throw that onto your kids also. Would you agree? And she was like, ooh, yeah, okay, great. I can see where you're coming from. So get rid of the beliefs and the stories in your head of like, well, I grew up this way and they can do it the same way I grew up. Like, it's about it's about creating the best environment for the kids, right? That's what really matters. And I'm not a believer in like, let's sugarcoat the kids and let's bubble wrap the kids. And, this is not me saying have no expectations on your kids, and whatever your kids want to do is totally fine. If they want to stay out late, go ahead. If they want to drink and do drugs, totally fine. I'm not saying they get a blank check. What I'm saying is you must limit the expectations to the things that matter, and then reinforce those with being solid, being rock solid on those things. And that clarity, it's about clarity. That's what creates a thriving environment for a child to grow up in, is clarity of where the boundaries are. When you have less and less clarity of what the boundaries are, or where the boundaries exist or where they don't, that creates dysfunction for a child. So that's the key thing that you got to do. Okay. So here's what you do. You pick those three. You and your spouse pick those three before you go and talk to your kid. Hopefully that should be obvious. Okay. You need to make sure that both spouses have a voice. You need to make sure that both spouses are on board with these three. So it doesn't necessarily work super well if one spouse, barges in and says, hey, these are the three things we need to have for our kid. Are you okay with these? Sound good? No, both spouses need to have a voice, and you need to make sure that you get a congruent yes from your spouse. So you shouldn't just go, hey, I think it should be these three things. What do you think? And then your spouse goes, yeah, that sounds good. Can't do that. You gotta dig. You gotta work with each other until you figure out what really, really matters. Okay. Once you've picked those three, make sure you have incredible clarity on what those three things mean. Do not speak in generalities. Don't say things like do the chores, get good grades. Okay, that's super general. What does that mean? Does that mean a B plus minimum in every class? Does that mean a B plus average? Does that mean all A's? Does that mean only an A in math? Like, what does that mean, right? You gotta spell it out and define it. Because think of it this way. Imagine going to work. Imagine working at a company, and the company, you've got two bosses that you report to. One boss has one set of expectations. Another boss has a different set of expectations. Neither one of them clearly communicates with each other. Neither one of them is on the same page. Some things you get rewarded for from one boss, but you get punished for another. In addition to that, it feels like there's no end to the list of expectations that they have. In addition to that, it feels like there's absolutely no way you could possibly please them. In addition to that, there's no clear boundaries as to what is allowed and what's not allowed. There's no clarity. How do you think you would feel operating at a job like that? You'd probably check out mentally. You'd probably act out. Some part of you would go, screw it. Like, who cares? They're just going to get mad no matter what. Or you would leave the job, right? And in the case for me, like, I wanted to leave in the form of suicide, right? So some kids will want to leave in that extreme way. Other kids will just want to leave in different ways. They'll only want to spend time with their friends and never with you. They'll leave in the form of alcohol or drugs or whatever it is you don't want them to be doing. So you've got to create an environment that they want to be in, right? Not that they want to be in it all the time or that they should be, but that, they can thrive in. Just like in the same way there's ways you create a work environment for people to thrive, you create a home environment for people to be able to thrive. And clarity of where the boundaries are is key. Now, here's what you do. You pick the 3, and then you sit down with the kid. And here's what you got to say. The framing around this is really important. What you say to your child is you say, hey, there's Dad and I feel like we've probably put a lot on you. We feel like there's been a lot of expectations, and we want to apologize because that makes it feel unfair. It probably makes it feel challenging for you to know what do we really expect of you, and probably just makes you feel frustrated. And we totally get that. We totally understand that. And what we're here to tell you is we want to simplify things with you. We really only have 3 simple expectations, okay? These are non-negotiable, and if you just simply do these 3 things, I guarantee you, Dad and I, we are going to be the happiest parents. We are going to be the proudest parents. We will be thrilled, okay? You just do these 3 things, it's all good, and then you tell them what those 3 things are. Okay, and then the trick, of course, is you back it up, you reinforce it. So you and your partner need to be on the same page about what punishments go out if they're not followed, and then what rewards go out if the 3 are followed. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's all it comes down to. Again, think of if you were a manager at a workplace, what would you do? You clarify for the employees, here's what the expectations are, and then you reward and reinforce them, right? When they are doing the thing you want them to do, you celebrate them, you put them up on a pedestal, you say good things about them, you make sure that they know that you notice, okay? And then if they fall out of line a couple times, you are nice, you are kind, but you are firm, and you say, hey, no, this is how we're doing things. Okay. And in severe cases where you've communicated it very clearly, you've made sure they had an opportunity to get their questions answered, and they're still acting out of line, then, you might need to have some sort of a punishment of some kind, right? It's the same exact principle here. Okay. So the pick 3 strategy really works. It works incredibly well. So if you make sure that your mental health is right where it needs to be, that you've gotten a solution in place for your anxiety or your mental health issues, check. That's going to be a very, very big check for your kids' overall well-being. That's the single most important thing you can do to set your kids up for success, both as a child and long-term for life, is to provide an excellent role model for them of how to navigate through life with mental and emotional stability. You've got to do that. And by the way, you can't just put on a face that you're doing that. That's even worse, actually, right? What it would actually be better for you to do is to drop the mask and be real with your kids and to let them know, like, hey, Mom and Dad, like, hey, we're struggling with this kind of thing right now, but to not like wallow in it and not like show them that you're doing nothing about it. Like, you need to present a role model of, yep, we're being honest, we're being real, that these issues exist, but we're being solution oriented. And let me show you what Mom is doing to deal with these issues. Let me show you what Dad is doing to take ownership of this. And then you go and you fix the problem. You get help if you need the help, or you find a method that you believe in and you stick with the method, or whatever. You experiment if you have to, but you do what you got to do to take it seriously and get it dealt with. That's number 1. Number 2 is if there's a lingering issue that's causing emotional tension and resistance inside of the relationship between the parents, you deal with that also. And you want to, again, be open, be transparent. Like, don't hide your arguments from your kids. Don't hide your problem solving from your kids. Give your kids a template of what effective problem solving and communication looks like. That's what they need. They need to be able to see what effectively dealing with issues looks like. You're not helping them by hiding things from them. Okay, because basically by hiding it from the kids, you're just justifying not solving the problem. You're justifying, well, I don't really need to deal with this because it's not affecting the kids because the kids aren't seeing it, but they are being affected by it. So you need to bring it out into the air. That doesn't mean like, they're a part of every single discussion you and your spouse have, but it just means like if Mom and Dad had a big giant fight Monday night, there isn't just total hushed silence in the house for the rest of the week. Like, yeah, when it's Tuesday dinner, you talk about it, you address it, you say, hey, just so you know, Mom and Dad, we had obviously a big argument. We just want to let you know we worked it out. Everything's good. Here's what we basically came to a realization of. That is the type of leadership you need to be demonstrating. It will help your kids massively, okay? Because kids, we all, especially if you're over the age of 30, we all grew up typically with parents who did not provide a template of what productive, proactive problem solving looked like. We grew up with parents who did the hush and hide method, which is exactly what you're probably trying to do with your kids. And that's why we all grew up to be adults who didn't know how to deal with our shit. And that's why people like me have a job, because I get to help people learn how to solve these problems, right? But I'm just telling you, this is the stuff that works, okay? Now, last thing that I'm going to leave you with, if you fixed your own mental health, you fixed what's going on with the marriage, and then you've gotten alignment and you've stuck with that alignment plan for a couple of months, if for any reason you are still dealing with an issue with your child, then the last thing that could be going on is what we call a model of the world conflict. And basically what that comes down to is this is the core of what drives all anxiety and emotional pain. What causes anxiety and emotional pain is when there is a chronic disconnect, we could call it, between your subconscious model of the world and how life actually is. So when you have a subconscious model of the world, what that means is you have a set of beliefs about how the world is supposed to go. So if you have a set of beliefs that says, I'm supposed to be perfect, I'm supposed to please everybody, I'm supposed to achieve massive things, I need to be in control, I need to be certain of everything, any one of those will cause anxiety, because your brain will be constantly trying to get life to match up to those unrealistic expectations. So what sometimes happens is children will develop a model of the world. They will believe that there is a certain way that they have to be in order to be good enough and worthy of love, and they will be perpetually trying to meet that unmeetable model of the world. And guess who influences that model of the world the most? You. The strongest force in what shapes mental patterns for people before the age of 25, and even afterwards actually, is they will try to be who they believe they have to be in order to win over your approval and your love. And they are not going to go necessarily off of what you say per se. They're going to be intuiting all of the different signals, what it is that they feel that you punish them for, what it is that they feel that you reward them for, what it is that they feel that you give them love in response to, what it is that they do that makes them feel like you pull love away from them. So that's why these other aspects we've talked about are so critical, because if one or more of the parents is disjointed, anxious, insecure, they're not going to be communicating very clearly through their body language, through their emotional states to their kids what they expect of their kids. The messages are going to come out mixed and confused. The child is going to become confused. If you and your spouse are not on the same page, then it creates, again, a situation where your kid feels like they cannot win. So it creates anxiety, unrest, emotional pain. If you haven't picked what those three key things are and communicated those messages very clearly, your child doesn't know how to win, so to speak, and so they'll feel unrest, they'll feel emotional disturbance of some kind. And so what can sometimes happen, especially if any of those previous issues have been going on for several years, is your children may have started to begin to form a personality. Notice I am saying a personality, not the personality. A personality meaning it can change, it is malleable, it can be molded. And so if they've started to believe that they got to be perfect in your eyes in order to be good enough, then they're going to be in for trouble unless you do everything in your power to correct that as a parent. And so the whole 90-day process that we take people through in a nutshell is helping them identify every single belief that their subconscious has created that is clashing with reality and that's causing them anxiety. We help them identify it, we help them eliminate it, we help them replace it. And that's what you got to help your children do. Okay, if for any reason those other things didn't work, that would be the final thing. I will tell you, in all of my experience, I've never, ever had a situation where these things I just shared with you did not resolve the issue. Okay, and I can tell you for sure that if these are the things that my parents would have figured out way back when, then life would have turned out a little differently for me as well. So All you got to do is abide by this. It's very simple, not necessarily easy, but very simple. Okay, so please don't confuse yourself. Don't think you got to go, send your kid through 12 diagnostic quizzes and tests and doctors and all these different medications and all these things. This is how you deal with the real core of the problem. So I hope it helps you. Let us know in the comments if you've got questions. If you'd like additional one-on-one help and you have not already done a free mental health coaching session with me, just go ahead and type session below. Myself or a member of my team will reach out to you via Messenger online. We'll book a time that works for you, and I can advise you more thoroughly one-on-one. Or if you're listening on our podcast afterwards, just go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. You can book an appointment. Okay, just be mindful that I do not rebook no-shows. Okay, hope this has been helpful to you guys. Chat with you guys soon. See ya. Bye.